to order on November 5th at 6:35 p.m. Do you have a motion for an approval of the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. First study item this evening, just re-elevating the equity committee work for the board. I know that we have looked at this draft of the Educational Equity Committee charge, and we've received some feedback from our consultants at MAP Center. In re-reviewing that feedback, see that Cynthia had some specific questions and just, I think, further information that she wanted us to think about around the dynamics of the board. You know, a lot of things around just how we think this board is going to function and how it's going to provide information up to the board level. We definitely need to dig into that some more, and I have a request into her to find some time with, you know, some subset of the board to actually dig into her questions and see if the MAP Center has some samples or just, you know, best practices that could address the questions that she raised. So I just, again, wanted to elevate that for folks here, that we haven't paused it, even though we've had to slow some stuff down, and wanted just to see if there were any questions or concerns or reactions folks have around the committee work as we're, you know, continuing to just try and revive that institutionalizing happened through the resolution and then the policy, and now actually putting a committee into place.
So I've got a couple things maybe I could just kick off, and
Sure.
we don't need to go into like a lot of detail
Yeah.
on all of these. Maybe they could just be used with the further discussion with Cynthia. I appreciate you sharing the doc with Cynthia's comments, because they kind of kind of piggyback off of a lot of some of what she put forward. A couple things came to mind. Just, you know, I know she highlighted like the word dissolved, and that's kind of like a pretty aggressive word about some of the other groups and all of that. You know, for me, the mission of the group just seems a little close to the work that we're supposed to be doing as a board, right? Policy is really something that a Board of Education is tasked with, right? That and financial leadership. And one other minor thing is, I really do think that whatever our future permanent superintendent looks like should be a part of this process in some way, whether it's ex officio, whether it's like non-voting. But the context to discussing this work needs to be, I think, given to the committee members by the leader of the district, who has got kind of a global perspective on what's happening in the district. And the only other thing I would say is, as I was reflecting on this, it sort of reminded me a little bit, we never did this, but there was a years ago, we had kicked around the idea of creating a citizens finance committee. It's not totally analogous to what this equity work would do, because I think, but the idea there was to provide, you know, school finance is sort of a science all to itself, right? It's, Chris can attest to this. It's not easily understood even by folks that are like knee deep in it, but the idea to provide more transparency to the community, you know, bring citizens on who might have questions about how their taxpayer dollars are being spent, why they're being allocated in the way that they are. It wasn't just educating the community, it was a two-way conversation. And so maybe that speaks more to like the mission of the group, to maybe broaden a little bit and be more of a, you know, here's what the district is doing in terms of equity and in terms of, you know, where do you guys see this in your lives, or in, you know, what else do you have, you know, to offer to the group, and what would you challenge us to do better on, you know, I think is a little more, I'm not trying to water down the important work at all. I think it's still really important work, but that sort of Citizens Finance Committee had some framework to it that I thought might be helpful as well in discussing like how we bring this forward.
So
Thank you. So at first, and I think I shared this with you, Katie, when I reviewed this, I kind of had this reaction like, oh no, there's some language in here that I'm really not comfortable with, and I'm not sure that administration's going to be comfortable with staff. But then with time, especially with Cynthia's comments as they came in, I kind of felt like, okay, I kind of want to, I think a good next step also is to do that deeper dive with Cynthia on this, because some of the things that she brought up, I was thinking, and there's things that she brought up that hadn't even hit my radar.
Sure.
And you bring up a really good point about that Citizens Finance Committee thing, because there is conversation now in education about the equity piece of how we're spending our money and allocating our funds, and I think that this is a good place, and we never really went anywhere with it. It was a great idea, you know, sometimes those goes to committee and they die.
Yeah.
And I think this might be that opportunity. So I don't have quite as a harsh reaction to it as I was having, because I've now been able to read Cynthia's comments. And knowing that this is going to be a process, that we're not just like, this is the, you know, the charge put forward.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be a lot of input from all of us on this, and somehow or another we'll get to where we need to be. So,
Yeah.
my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, my vision for this committee is some sort of hybrid of like TLC and like CBTF. I mean, I think that this is something where we ask some stakeholders that have a real stake in the outcome, you know, to review some things for us, to kick around some you know, challenges for us, to get input from a variety of perspectives, including student perspective and staff perspective and educators perspective. I do think, you know, in some similar ways that CBTF bring and TLC bring specific recommendations that they've vetted with their, you know, their committee to the board, that then we can ask questions about, is important. But I do also think that this has got to be a space for dialogue in the broader community too, and getting us all on some similar pages about, how do we make decisions with an equity lens, and how are we defining terms. And I could see this group also making recommendations around, you know, programming that we, you know, could do for, you know, with the community, you know, sort of thing. Obviously we have internal programming that's already happening, but so that I think there's some role and responsibility defining that still needs to happen, and I think some just, again, hybrids of committees that we know are happening around the region, but also the kinds of committee work that's happening within our own district too. So, great.
And I would say, like, you know, one small quibble with, I mean, we're gonna have board representation and possibly administrative or superintendent representation. I think there was something in there about the committee coming to the board to speak directly to us multiple times, and or at least once a year or something like that. And I understand the spirit behind that, but I also think we've got a format that the board members on the committee should really advocate, I think, off for the group for the committee, and, you know, additional access like that is something that might not be, you know, necessarily the right precedent, given, like, we don't do that for other committees or other, even like Joe's Place, where we spend, you know, considerable resources on. So I'm open to however that shakes out, and some of that could be driven more by the mission and how we work with this committee, but, you know, those are just on the document side that we're comfortable.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think to that point, you know, if it does take a more of a TLC sort of approach, and I'm open to the question too of, should we have board specifically on this committee, or is this something that we're welcome to attend or observe, but it's not, you know, we're getting more of presentations from this group? Or is it, again, something that is more like we have a representative to the wellness committee that reports back to us?
Well, I think we have a lot of work to do on it. I guess I just am kind of curious about, you know, what our next steps are. Obviously, I would like to try to involve leadership in this conversation now. as well. But like because I'm a process freak, just, Katie, are you envisioning that we're gonna try to maybe, I would say rather than do it as subsec, because there's just 7 of us in a small administrative team, we could easily all get on a call with Cynthia. We all certainly enjoyed our time with her and would probably like to reconnect. I know some of you have reconnected since, so.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
I think if folks, Roxanna and I have talked about her previous engagement with MAP Center too. Sorry, I have
They
swallowed
do,
something.
they give really good feedback, and, the feedback that I would give from an administrative perspective, just from reviewing it, just 2 main things, which I think have already been touched on. One, we want to make sure that if the committee's operating, we've got enough folks that have context and know what happens, because equity is an interesting topic. We've talked about educational inequity, so we've got it embedded in multiple places in the system.
Yeah.
And if you're not aware of all of those things, looking at one thing sometimes gives you a different slice as if you look at the 10 things that support that one thing. And so making sure that committee is well supported and has context, but also has enough external voices that we're getting the external perspective. And then the thing I think that alarmed most of us when we read it was that dissolving language, because it says something about being the sole equity committee. But because we believe in equity, we have many, many, many groups that work throughout the schools that do equity audits and do lots of work. So I don't think that language was intended to say they should stop their equity work.
Right.
So we just have to figure out how to define that role so that the work throughout the school can continue, and then this group has a very specific, important part to play in that work.
Great.
Yeah, I agree with that. I kind of read it like, because it was talking about the focus is on equity, that they're talking about a group that the whole focus is equity, but I also agree that because equity is so ingrained in everything that we do, almost every group is gonna have some type of equity, role to play.
Joe's place, for
Right,
example,
exactly.
CBTF.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but I think if we define it a little more widely, right, to say, this is what this group is doing, this is the definition of that, and no other group is doing that, which is the whole shebang. But yeah, I agree. I don't mind, but I don't think we need dissolve necessarily, because we are the one, that board will do certain things and other boards do other things, right? Right. So.
Yeah. All right, so it sounds like folks are glad to be kind of re-reminded about this work, and that finding a work session specifically with Cynthia in the not too distant future would be agreeable.
Absolutely.
We will work on setting that up, and again, appreciate that folks are thinking critically about this work, because it should be an embedded piece of the structure. So, great. Well, I will turn it over to Roxanna then for the
Great,
next
so I just
agenda.
want to give you a survey update. We are planning on a survey going out in the next 2 weeks, and after talking with the team, we decided the best way to do this was to use a tool that we actually had purchased for the district last year. It's Panorama, and it's a survey instrument that allows us to look at social emotional learning for students, but also look at school climate, and revisiting that instrument and wanting some continuity in data, and also noticing that they added a lot of current environment specific types of information that we would need. We thought that it made the most sense to use a tool that we could integrate into our school improvement processes as well. So there will be a student component. We'll be asking questions around their current learning experiences and supports, characteristics of learner self-assessment, their perceptions of their own efficacy and effort throughout virtual learning, and then a bunch of questions about student well-being and mindset, as well as engagement. The teacher portion of that will ask again about both the student experience and the teacher experience. There is questions about staff morale and climate, There are a series of questions that I think is important around teacher well-being and mindset as well as their perceptions of leadership and planning and their support needs. And then finally, there will be a parent component that is really focused on their students' learning experiences, how well their communication needs have been met, their perceptions of their students' needs, and then any barriers that they see to engagement or success for their students. We think that that package of questions at the end of first quarter will give us quite a lot of information to help us make improvements for second quarter, and then our intention would be to do a quarterly survey. They may not all be quite as lengthy as this one is. It's going to run between 30 and 40 questions, I think, in each question set. But that information should be very useful to us as we think about meeting student needs, particularly with our interventions pieces. Any questions about the survey work? Great.
Glad to be able to connect that to Panorama. It's exciting.
All right. I think we're ready for Ed then.
All right, good evening.
Goodness.
I am here tonight to outline a decidedly ambitious series of initiatives which the MRH Communications Department is undertaking. There is no doubt, certainly, that we are in the midst of a vibrant area or era of transition across the district, both at the administrative level and, frankly, throughout the hallways and the classrooms as well. It is time now that we demonstrate for our families and employees in simple, every single day, performing the duties which are necessary to ensure that whenever the time comes to reoccupy the buildings, we always have our cornerstones in mind and we are promoting community that is of utmost importance to us. So let's begin with our website. Ms. Meacham's section is totally revamped. That part is done. It is designed to sort of introduce her with educational and biographical background information. One of the highlights will be, or I guess the highlight, will be a series of weekly messages to the community. I hope you saw this week's edition. It was warmly received by a number of people. We got a fair amount of feedback to it. I like to think that's because it was sort of a window into her personality, the side of our leader, which most people don't get to see, really. So by now, most people are familiar with the bright yellow bar on the website, which takes users to the COVID-19 page. Ultimately, it will feature much more accessible information, namely an improved explainer of what all that data means. It will also feature a dynamic dashboard, which will highlight the big three areas of emphasis, which are, of course, the positivity rates and the transmission rates and the new cases per 100,000. So this slate explains where our information will originate. We have found that these sources are reasonably reliable, and I will mention that other districts with active dashboards, that is the ones which have kids and staff in buildings right now, are utilizing these sources as well. Now, I'm really excited about this part because it gives my department an opportunity to demonstrate what's happening right now and actually has been happening on our grounds and in our offices and other spaces. The message is we are not dormant. We'll be spotlighting the work which is underway in all of these divisions using our social media platforms and the website, of course, and the emphasis will be on video presentations. Now, our website currently has a section for staff resources, which is password protected, but the problem is it's not being properly promoted to our employees, and it is certainly underutilized, so we're going to change that. Well, we have, by my count, at least a dozen employee action committees. Oh, here we go with an Amber Alert. Stand by.
We turn the alerts off.
Golly. All right, so I was saying we have, by my count, about a dozen employee action committees. Many employees serve on multiple committees. The new staff resources section will consolidate things like agendas and meeting schedules and committee rosters without folks having to search through Google documents all the time. Everything will be in one place, and that piece is already well underway. We got a lot done on that part today. Now, I talked about video. We have a number of staffers who already deploy videos every week already. I think we know who those are. We're going to expand that again with the aim of demonstrating to the public that we are on site and we're doing the good work of MRH every single day. So this multi-tiered communications plan is necessary, we believe, in order to maintain the tight connections which we've established with our stakeholders. We just can't allow that connection to erode, and we're not going to do it. So that's what I got.
Great. I appreciated the communication that come out from Roxana so far, and obviously the support that the rest of the team's providing for that. I think that makes a lot of sense to do the MRH personal touch, kicked up even more. So.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
All right. Onto the dashboard then.
All right, let's take a look at this COVID data dashboard for this week. The data for this week was prepared on the afternoon of November 3rd. We used the same three sources that Ed has mentioned. We take data from the state DESI website. We take data from the county health department website, and then we get data from Ed Plus 3 times a week, which is coming from the local health systems reports. That data, having data from 3 different sources, is very useful because we're able to triangulate the data and make sure that the numbers that we're presenting to you are as accurate as possible. So the big news in Missouri and unfortunately in St. Louis County right now is that case rates are going up at a somewhat alarming rate. So the numbers are actually headed in the wrong direction. You can take a look at these numbers and see that they are climbing. Take my glasses off so I can read what they fogged up. I couldn't even read my notes anymore. I was in a fairly lengthy meeting today with health department officials from St. Louis County and surrounding counties. They cautioned us to, as thoughtful decision makers for schools, not to take a single case or a sample case and become alarmed and extrapolate that to make decisions. So they've encouraged us to stay the course and continue to look at all the data that's being provided, and are giving guidance as such, which I will interject as we go through this presentation. Transmission rate is up. Remember that we want that number to be less than 1. You see the county rate is at 1.16. Last time I presented this data to you, it was at 1.06. So it is going up slowly. You might be interested to know the high point occurred in August, and that was a 1.6. So we're still not in that range yet, but it is going up. The CDC indicators are there. I won't spend time on those slides. We've already talked through that, but I leave them there for your reference. When we look at new cases each day, these are the numbers that are causing the most concern. You can see that they are up significantly since last report. When I last reported to you, the 7-day average per 100,000 was 24.65. You can see that it has moved up to 28. There have been some days in the last 7-day period where we've had 500 new cases or more a day. And so that 14-day rolling average has increased each day in the last 7 days. What the health department has reminded us to do is to remind people to please stay out of environments that are unsafe and are not providing layers of protection. I think the overarching message is if people behave responsibly and safely, we create environments where everyone can move about, but if that's not happening, then they are advising people to stay at home, right? The positivity rate, when we look at that, has also gone up. When I last reported, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 8, and now it is at 9.5. With one report that I saw, there was one report that varied from the 3, and it had it as high as 11. Remember, that unduplicated rate is something the state is reporting, because many people who believe they have COVID get tested multiple times, and so that unduplicated rate just represents one test per person, and they would exclude other multiples, so that you can see that that rate is actually much higher if you look at that rate. In the central corridor, it's still relatively low compared to everywhere else, but I do want to point out that is double last time we talked. So last time we talked, it was 2.3 in the central corridor. Our zip code data, in the 63117 zip code, we went from 9 to 41 cases, but in the 63143 cases are actually down. This next slide looks at school age case rate per 100,000. Case rates remain low for 5 to 14-year-olds. 15 to 19-year-olds are still trending high. This is an area of concern. At least one of our neighboring superintendents and I discussed this earlier in the week, and he actually made some calls to the Mercy system to see if he could get some additional information. And what he found out is those 18 to 19-year-old rates also include 18 and 19-year-olds who are in area universities, and that we believe at this time that a bulk of those cases are actually with university students, but they are still showing in the 18 to 19-year-old age range. When we look at the total number of new diagnoses by age group, we actually do have some positive news on this slide. So there's actually a decrease of 28% in diagnoses for 5 to 9-year-olds, and a decrease by 11% of diagnoses for 0 to 4-year-olds. That high rate of increase seems to be among the 20 to 30-somethings in our current population. You can also see from this slide that the 15 to 19-year-olds remain high.
Roxanna, can I ask you a quick question?
Of course you can.
Do we have the testing rate?
We do. I don't have them in this slide, but I can tell you that the testing rate, we do have that. Are you interested about testing rate overall or testing rate for age groups?
For the age group only, because I would be, like, if the testing rate is about the same and then the cases are going down, that would indicate to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, that that's a good sign. But if they're testing less, is it related to not testing?
So overall, I'll answer it in this way, and it's going to be a partial answer to your question because I don't have those numbers right in front of me, and I don't want to speak to data that I haven't, really looked at. Overall, I can tell you the testing rate is much higher. So even though the total case rate went up, the testing rate also went up. What I can tell you generally about particularly 0 to 9-year-olds is that testing rate is very low because people aren't generally taking their young children in just to get tested. If they're testing a young child, it's because they have symptoms. Right. And so that testing rate has remained relatively low and relatively stable. I can't answer specifically by age range. We can get that data if you're really interested, but that's one thing that we do know is this is not a group of people who are getting tested frequently. So it's a relatively low testing rate. Mm-hmm. I would like to see it if anybody else would, just because that helps me understand the numbers and what they really mean, though your explanation is very helpful as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll see what I can turn up for you. All right, here's the total positive student cases within MRH boundaries. So from last week, that number went up by 1. We were at 16 for a total number by 1. And remember that when we report the case rates, that 1 to 10, we never report single digits because we don't want to identify a student, okay? Here's the positive case rate counts as of November 4th. Currently in the district, we've had 4 people overall, and there were no cases as of November 4th. I may have one more to report to you at the next go-around based on some information I heard today, but that's not confirmed. Okay. Currently quarantined due to exposure. As of November 4th, we had 2 people who were currently in quarantine, both from exposure off premises. I also wanted to mention to you that in the meeting with county health officials today, I'm actually very excited about this. They have been really poring over metadata analysis about the transmission on school grounds, right? And what they found out in districts that have been open internationally, so this is an international study, what they found out is that the transmission rate overall, after looking at thousands, hundreds of thousands of cases actually, is less than 1% at school. Now that does not mean that there are not COVID positive people at school and quarantines are happening, but there seems to be a relatively low amount of transmission at school. The paradox to that though is if there's a high amount of community spread, then schools are continually disrupted because people have to go into quarantine as a mitigating measure because they've had exposure outside of school, and so that creates a disruption as you're quarantining potentially larger groups of people based on exposure in the community. So the message that we heard today, and what I'm excited about, is Missouri is working with the CDC to do a replication study in Missouri from Missouri data so that we know exactly what is happening in schools now that they have a roadmap of achieving that data. So that's something we've been asking for a while. I'm very excited to see that happening so that we know once and for all what's actually happening on the ground in schools in Missouri. But the overall message was, you know, in order to get kids back in school safely and without disruption to families and to schools, is we really have to work on the out-of-school behavior, which is where the transmission is happening. And so we're going to be, as a district, trying to think of how we best message for families what some safety protocols can look like at home, particularly with holidays upcoming. We want to do our part to signal, you know, what that, I'm a social studies teacher, so I always think of it as good citizenship, right? But what are those common good strategies that we should all be practicing because we want our kids back in school? So we talked quite a lot about that difficult message and how people hear things on the news and misinterpret data about why is, you know, why do I do this and why do I do that and why is it different in a school environment? Vince and I were talking today about, well, if in our homes we all had masks and plexiglass and hand sanitizers and all of the things, obviously, you know, that I need an adult to follow me around and remind me to wash my hands and do my, you know, do my things. Obviously that creates a relative degree of safety, but the messaging is often problematic. And so one of the things I also heard today that I'm very excited about is they are all meeting, the health departments are all meeting to strategize how in the Monday briefings, when they give the general community message, they can also give a secondary message about specific to schools to try to help people begin to understand what does it mean in terms of community spread and then what does this mean in a school environment. So hopefully that will help us a bit as well. But I think the overall message with the data that I just really wanted to communicate to you is there's a lot of really fine minds in the St. Louis area who are meeting regularly to take a look at this stuff and make sense of it, and also to try to figure out, you know, what our next steps are. I did hear from several superintendents today that many of their plans for return of high school students and even middle school students are more than likely not happening. And so I think you'll be seeing in coming days more schools who've decided to postpone any return to learning, at least for the secondary students. And then we're waiting to see, we're hoping that this community spread does not continue an upward trend indefinitely, because that then could even impact younger students at that point. So that's what I know as of today.
Roxanne, a quick question. Did they notice any differences between the schools that are going back full-time and those that are in like a hybrid model?
What kind of differences are you talking about in terms of transmission?
Yes.
No, in terms of transmission at school, no.
Okay.
What they have said as an overall trend is that COVID cases are in schools, and that most of the time when they've done contact tracing, that transmission has occurred not at school, but in other in other places, but they were quick to say, right, that that does not mean that transmission can't happen.
Right.
You know, anytime there's a COVID case, transmission can't happen, but the transmission rates within school buildings tends to be low. However, that quarantining and the positive cases are causing all manner of disruption in schools. And so we have to figure out how to balance, you know, those needs, and that's really where the conversation is right now, is what is the least disruptive for students? How do we get a handle on what's going on in the community to help ease that disruption?
Back to the slide deck, slide number 4 that has the CDC rainbow on it.
Yep.
Based on the information that we have, I acknowledge that all the data that we have for Missouri and for St. Louis is 7-day, and this is, you know, the core indicators are 14-day windows. But are we still in kind of this like yellow-orange space? Is that
in terms of new cases, you're in the highest transmission risk
Okay.
now. In terms of the positive cases, that's going to be the positivity rate. So the positivity rate for the county right now is, so it's going to be kind of here in this yellow-orange.
okay?
Okay? But the new case rate is rapidly expanding and is alarming everyone, I think.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. That is the county data, yes.
All right. Any other questions, concerns about that?
I appreciate your synthesis.
Mhm.
Yes.
All right. Then layers of protection, Mr. Whalen?
Hey, good evening, guys. This is a review for us, but it's been a while. We're revisiting since we're expanding on-campus intervention and always thinking about return to school. Am I up there?
Oh, is it still me? Have I not released yet?
That's okay. We know you're ready. The technology.
So Chris, is there a trick here? I go to this Research and Design Center, right? Sorry about that.
If you want to unhook, I can, he's going to help you.
Thanks, Chris. I'm such a good mechanic, he walks over and just fixes it, so. Yeah, we're just gonna review the layers of protection that we have in place, and just kind of answer any questions you might have, about what we have plans for students on campus and staff. So the first thing is, and everyone knows this by now, mask is one of the primary layers of protection. One of the things that we struggled with when we first started planning about school in the spring was like, can kids wear masks? We'll be able to keep them on and those kind of things. And what we've learned is that, as we've seen kids come on campus, kids of all ages are absolutely fine wearing the mask, with few exceptions. And it's been really encouraging. Real small kids, 5-year-olds, no problem. So it's been really encouraging. Probably more, we have to remind more staff to keep their mask on and above their nose than the kids. So they feel real good about that. We do have an ample a supply of disposable masks in the nurse's office. And we also are going to provide 2 reusable masks for all students when they return and for staff as well. So we're well prepared with staffs. And the primary reason for stats, as you know, is about the respiratory droplets. It's a good layer of protection to keep folks from being exposed to the droplets, which still is a primary source of transmission. Hand hygiene, you guys have heard this a million times, but we are well placed and well prepared for hand hygiene. We have hand sanitizer in all the classrooms. And I don't know if you've been in the elementary school, but they have the kind of the foot pump. They're all over the place. They're going to have scheduled times to kind of make sure that they're visiting those hand sanitizer stations in their rooms. Mike, what does every classroom have with regards to hand sanitizer?
Shortly, when we get the supply, we'll have in every classroom an automatic hand sanitizer that will be mounted next to the door. But until those come in, which we expect by the end of November, first week of December, as you can imagine, everybody and their brother and sister wants everything, and manufacturers are having a difficult time keeping up. But in another slide, I'll go over some of the sanitizing items that will be in every classroom.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And again, the benefit of the hand sanitizer is about touching your face, either from the high touch surfaces or in exposure to respiratory droplets. We are using, this is something we debated about for a long time, about temperature checks versus daily health checks. And the real, is that me? Okay. That was a point of emphasis. All right. You guys are daydreaming, checking election results over there. But we did settle on daily health checks as a reminder for people to really think about, should I come to work? Should I come to school? Do I have a fever? Am I feeling well? We want them to stay home. So we're going to use daily health checks. The temperature checks have not proven to be reliable source of screening and can create certain logistical problems. So there will be daily health checks as well. And social distancing, one of the other cornerstones of layers of protection. And we've been really thoughtful about how the classrooms are designed. The classrooms are really set up right now for if and when we return to a tier 2. Distance as much as they could, plexiglass on all the student tables, signage and how they have the traffic in the hallways. And it's interesting because there's not many people here now, but I do follow the signs. Like, I'll be going down the hall and I'll kind of follow the arrows up the stairs and down the stairs, even if there's no one really around, just to practice, which is one of the benefits of having on-campus interventions and staff coming around, so they get a chance to practice some of these things, you know. So we have signage that will help with flow through the buildings. I think the thing that I want to commend the district for investing in the school board and Mike's team is the plexiglass barriers, because not all schools are investing in that. And that's an additional layer of protection, particularly if social distancing, keeping kids 6 feet apart will be difficult, even if only half the kids are here. So it provides an additional layer of protection there. And again, it's about preventing transmission, respiratory droplets. Now let Mike talk about cleaning and disinfecting.
Thank you. Before I get started, I just want to share with the board, I am so proud of our custodial and maintenance staffs. They truly recognize that what they do will be able to allow our students to come back. They know how important their jobs are, and you can just see a sense of pride with them every day, and I'm extremely gratified for that. There's been a lot of things that we have done, and it's been little piece by piece as we notice that we need to do additional things, but as of today, every custodian has an electrostatic sprayer. It's a battery-powered one, and it's going to be on their cart. So they, wherever they go to clean, whether it's a classroom, cafeteria, restrooms, they'll have this. And these sprayers with the chemical that we're using for it has been very effective for both COVID-19 as well as common flu virus. There'll be sanitation wipes in the classrooms. Hand sanitizing stations and dispensers are going to be in the classrooms. We're doing daily cleaning and disinfecting schedules. When early on we were asked, well, what part of our nightly duties aren't we going to do because we're going to be doing all the sanitation? I said, no, sanitation is in addition to your normal. And they're finally understanding you can't sanitize dirt and other stuff, so they're really into it. Common areas, classrooms, food areas, the bus. Every bus has their own electrostatic sprayer. And we've been trying to do some research what other districts are doing. However, we are going to spray between each drop-off of students before the bus picks up. Once they empty their bus, they're sanitizing the bus so that if the virus is in there from one of the occupants, it won't transmit or have the opportunity to transmit when we pick up another group. The big key for that is that it's going to help assist with contact tracing. You don't, if in the first stop you have COVID in there and then it keeps duplicating itself to the next group of students, it'll be almost impossible. So that's, we've timed it out. It's approximately 5 minutes between sanitizing the bus before they can get more students on the bus. So that's a big thing. And also, we've been doing some research for playground cleaning protocols. And so we are hoping, especially in the spring, students will be able to go out, have recess, and our grounds people at the elementary and ECC also have an electrostatic sprayer, and they're going to hit the outside of the doors, handles, the entrance doors, but also first thing in the morning they will be spraying the equipment, because you can't really do it during the day. Sun helps get rid of the viability, plus it's being dissipated, but we have the community coming on our playgrounds. So that's why every morning we're going to hit that. And all of this is important to reduce the chances of transmission between individuals and high-touch areas and surfaces. Thank you.
I think the goal is people to know that the school might be the safest place to be, hopefully, when they do return. The biggest thing that we've been kind of really learning a lot about in the last month, and students have returned on campus for interventions, is the role of contact tracing and the role that our school nurses will be taking place in contact tracing. And we've had a little bit of practice. To Roxana's point earlier, the handful of cases involving our role with contact tracing have been staff or students being exposed to COVID outside of the school, not transmission between the school. But we had a chance to practice our protocols and our work with the Department of Health and our partnership with them. Again, the big things on the contact tracing and keeping the place safe is the daily health checks. We also do have isolation rooms if students do display symptoms. We are using quarantine protocols if they've been exposed to someone with significant contact with COVID-19. We are using the record keeping that's been recommended to us by the Department of Health. In fact, we're using their forms. We have contact tracing teams at all the buildings, a school nurse, and they've been our lead folks, building administrator, and a secretary, or someone who does the attendance. So there's kind of a multifaceted team, and they're getting some practice there. I've also done the contact tracing training. Roxana Meacham enjoyed the 6-hour training from the Johns Hopkins, which is industry standard. It is the longest video thing I've ever done, by the way. 6 hours was lengthy, but it was good. We do recognize, and obviously we're not here yet, but there are some guidelines about potential closure of school buildings and classrooms as the transmission in the community is high. I think it's over 5%. And we saw, I don't know if you saw on the paper today, but 5 schools are temporarily shut for a couple of weeks because of that, for that reason. And 3 of them in Jefferson County, a couple in St. Louis. The thing that we've had good practice with, even with the on-campus interventions, is assigned seating. That is a critical part of where people are and ability to contact trace, and also who's there that day. So every day we have a schedule that's printed out, and we know which kids not only were invited to come, but who actually did come and where they sat. And so, for example, we had a case, I mean, I won't give too much information, but we had a case of a student that had been exposed to COVID-19 from family. Unbeknownst, he had been in school, they had been in school, but we were able to quickly determine where that student sat. Was that student in close proximity to other students? They had not been. That student's quarantining appropriately. We did the paperwork with the Department of Health. No transmission in our school, but we were able to do that quickly because we knew that student had been here where they sat, okay, here's the seating chart, yep, it was very quick. So we're getting some practice with that. It's easy when there's only 25 kids there, so, but we want to practice some of the protocols now, so it's been really important. And I think that's a big key for us to work with the community on the community spread piece. I think that to Roxanne's point earlier, like I won't say it's a selling point, but in the messaging with the community is like, I know they want us to reopen, and so if we can work together on dealing with the community spread, which really is more likely about it coming into our buildings, we'll be able to open our buildings more quickly. So, anyway, that's the update. It's mostly a review. I know you've seen a lot of this before, but with regards to layers of protection in our plans right now.
We wanted to bring that back because those layers are part of the CDC guidance. When we look at those metrics, these are the things that have to be in place. And so I just want to make sure that you're fully aware of where we are in that planning and that, those things have been considered and are well in hand. And to Vince's point, we are practicing them daily because the execution of them, the ability to do that with fidelity for every person that's on campus is a key part of our strategy and why we'll be able to keep transmission rates, hopefully at zero.
Yeah. It's been I won't say enjoyable, but it's been heartening to see the students that are coming on campus on interventions, and they get in routines. So I've been watching this first grade student who's coming twice a week come into the school. They know to go to the fist pump. They don't need to be prompted. They're going pump, pump, boom, initial their name. They follow the directions. They go. They come back out. It's awesome, So that's really and helpful for the staff to do to kind of get in rhythm. So again, small sample size, but we're practicing masks, distancing, hand sanitizing. It's been good for us. It's been good for all of us to practice some of those things. It's much more difficult to think about this in July. We were just looking at lists, and guidelines, arrows, charts. It's a little bit overwhelming. So.
Thank you,
You're
Vince,
welcome.
and thanks for the detail. It's good to be. These are things we're all going to need to continue to be reminded of.
For sure.
And thanks to our bus drivers and also our custodians, they are doing heavy lifting. We really appreciate them as well.
On to temporary bus routes then.
This was initially when we talked about this agenda item, we thought we would have to draft some routes and seek your approval for new routes for the on-campus interventions. As we had met earlier last time we got together and talked about this, that you gave us the blessing to really begin using transportation for on-campus interventions. But what we discovered when we had a planning meeting that included Mike and Sydney Northern, who's our coordinator of transportation and the building admin, is that we could actually use the existing routes that you've already approved, the existing stops that you've already approved, and just have a weekly process by which the building administrators on Thursday morning tell Sydney Northern, these are the 9 kids I need picked up. See, we'll look at the approved routes and stops and say, okay, this is where we're going. Now next week, communicate that back to the building and to the families, and now we're using existing routes and stops. Obviously, we're not going to go to every stop. This isn't by state, but the nice thing is it gives us the flexibility to use approved routes and stops while being kind of efficient in terms of who we're picking up. So it didn't require another, and the thing is, it would have been futile to kind of draft a point in time bus route for next week that'll drastically change the following week in terms of who we're picking up. So that was the good news, and we came up with a nice, efficient system. Actually, the building administrators were great problem solvers, and I was just taking notes. So that's really the plan. So that's the quick update on transportation for on-campus interventions. I think it'll be a small group of students that'll be coming and using that. We're probably going to start that next week and probably more robustly the week of the 16th. We did modify the permission slip and invitation slip to create an opportunity for them to seek bus transportation, but we're not over-advertising. It's more as needed. We're still strongly encouraging families to provide their own transportation if they can, to walk or ride the bike if they can. But we want to create an option for the students that's a barrier that we can get them.
Any questions there? All right. The antigen testing update.
Yes, this gets more exciting. Antigen testing. I'm going to try to share this too. Hold on a second. It's going to be easier probably for you to read. I'm going to put it on the screen, but it might be easier for you to open because this is the PDF report. If you're able to, if you're on board docs, you can open that document. Back to back to back here. Okay. That's exciting. So basically, this has been a long journey. We got word from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, Department of Health and Human Services, and Abbott, who's the vendor, about the opportunity to possibly provide rapid testing on schools. And there was a lot of interest. And we're all looking for solutions. We're like, yeah, what's that about, you know? So they invited us to a webinar. The first thing we did is we went to a DHHS webinar, it was sponsored by DESE and Abbott, and it was actually great. It was clear, it was informative. There were I was looking at the chat, there were like 900 plus participants. There was high interest. And they are really working with schools to create this opportunity if schools are interested. Abbott would provide the testing for free. Schools would be on the hook for hazardous waste disposal and having N95 masks. So we got the information, began to explore what, kind of give an account of how many tests we'd be able to acquire. They would allow us to request, if we wanted to participate, one test per staff member and one test per student if we wanted to. It's still an if, you know. The next thing we did was reach out to other districts. Now, it's not that I'm the show me state guy, but I'm always interested in seeing what my colleagues and our colleagues around that region are doing. And it was interesting because after people had a chance to kind of begin weighing pros and cons and challenges and benefits, most districts, at least in this region, decided to opt out. And I'll explain that in a little bit. But there were a few that decided to participate. Interestingly, so I heard from St. Louis Public, Special School District, Kirkwood, and St. Charles that they are going to go ahead and proceed. But of those four, St. Charles had the most clearly articulated thinking about it because they've been in school since August 27th. So they had a better sense of their workflow, what they could manage, and if they could incorporate this layer of protection. The rest of us are just getting back into having students around. And so our sense of whether or not we can do this easily, we're kind of a little bit blind on it. So I did include, but there are 356 schools that have inquired about it. Okay, inquired about it. And I did, and I'm not going to go through all these, but I did list for you, just for your education and for your information, the benefits that were identified and some of the challenges, you know. So the potential benefits, obviously, is you get quick information about a student or staff member that might be having some symptoms. It can be beneficial in terms of starting contact tracing, implementing quarantining protocols quickly, et cetera. The challenge is, that's really the best benefit, and that is a benefit, as opposed to waiting a few days, et cetera. The challenge is, it's a 30 to 45 minute recommended window from the time you initiate the testing. You have to go to the isolation room, and you have to dispose of the PPE and swabs. All things that we could do. We feel like we could do that. But we're just not clear. I think some of the school's hesitation was on how that would interrupt the flow in healthcare and roles that the nurse has with around contact tracing and other responsibilities throughout the building. So one of the hesitations was, can we layer that on top of everything else? For schools that do not have or in more remote areas where access to testing and primary health care is more limited, this makes sense to me. In areas where we feel like we can connect them to primary health care providers and testing, I think for those schools are feeling like we have other options rather than doing that ourselves. There's no major liability concerns. We checked with our attorney and our insurance company, and as long as we follow protocols and do the training, we could do this if we chose to. It is, just to be clear, that this rapid testing is only for people who are showing symptoms. So it's not a case where I think I might have been exposed over the weekend, can you test me? It's an ineffective test for that. It's for symptomatic folks, it's most accurate in the first 7 days. But the accuracy is decent. But again, I think the concerns were around capacity and time. And also this idea that you can't really, our nurses aren't diagnosticians, so they can't say you have COVID-19, they can just give you the results of the test. The other challenge that we saw, let's say if a student had some symptoms, we did the rapid test on that student, it proved negative, they'll still have to go home. And we still might want them to see their primary health care provider to figure out what's going on with them. And I thought about a case we had recently. We had a student that was on campus. They exhibited a low-risk symptom. That student had a medical condition that hadn't been really addressed in a while. So the nurse used that as an opportunity to get that student back to the doctor to get the medication that they needed. I was thinking that if we had given that student a rapid test, it would have been negative, and then once he stopped exhibiting symptom A, he would have come back 24-hour symptom-free, but maybe never gotten the care that he or she needed. So we just thought that while there are some benefits around contact tracing, we thought that I think the trade-off in terms of how that might interrupt our flow and our other care needs might be too high. So that's, but I did outline who we spoke to. We spoke to other school districts, our district attorney, our district physician, our insurance company. Roxanne and I talked about this multiple times. She's been a great sounding board. She gives me some things to think about and dispatches me. I come back and report back. So where we landed today, and I met with the nurses this morning, is we'd like to recommend passing on it at this time and revisiting the opportunity when we have students back in the building and have a sense of our workflow and what we need to be managing. Because we've already, even without students being here full-time, just having a handful, we've already been doing a fair amount of contact tracing, which is extremely important work. And in terms of prioritizing their roles, the regular healthcare duties and contact tracing, we thought we would hold off because they felt pretty confident that they could find testing and find resources for families versus having to provide that themselves. So that's the recommendation that they wanted to share with you guys. It's a kind of a brief summary, but I tried to encapsulate it in this document that you have in case you wanted to read it later.
Vince, wasn't it also that recommended that the nurses would have N95 masks?
They would have to have N95 masks as a nationwide nurses shortage. We could, the logistical challenge, and that's one of them. And there's some reporting requirements. There's a 37 question you have to answer for everyone's a positive test. We felt like we could manage that if we had to. We could find N95. We think we could by January if we had to. We think we could figure out a way to do the reporting. It could be difficult. But the benefit wasn't strong enough to kind of figure out all the logistical challenges as well. And I think the N95 is recommended but not required. Yeah.
I mean, the fact that you can get a test, I know it's not a rapid test, but you can get a test at the CVS in Maplewood right now. I think testing in our community is probably not going to be
I think so.
that much of a challenge, right?
Exactly. And so we'll see though, but we might, and then the other thing, the good thing we might do is we're going to call, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that some districts are going to start this. So my contact that I had in St. Charles, she was terrific, and they're ordered the test, and they've been in school since August 27th, so I'm going to call her and see how's that going. Tell me how that's been flowing for you guys. So we're willing to revisit it, either for students and staff, or maybe just staff, when we get back to school full-time. That's our recommendation.
Do you know how much those tests are? I'm just curious.
All of it is free at this point.
Okay. Yeah, it's free, except for, it's a great question. It's free, the testing is free, except for the hazardous disposal. You have to get a biohazard disposal company for any swabs and PPEs that you have to get rid of, and then get a 95 mask.
Right.
Well, and,
Free at the CVS, somebody had to go.
I believe as part of CARES Act, it's, it continues to be free to anybody, even without insurance or.
Right. I can definitely see if I was in a rural part of the state where I would really want to do this, where testing's not as readily available.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No problem.
All right, and then MOCAP.
Yeah, so there's a timeline there. We do want to extend virtual option to families for second semester, and obviously, anyone can choose MOCAP virtual as part of Missouri law. So our timeline and our plan would be to get this general survey out through Panorama. There will be a question about, would you use the option, so we get a general sense of about how many people we're dealing with, which will help us make some preliminary staffing decisions. On December 11th, or thereabouts, we will put out another community message explaining folks' options and telling them what that enrollment window would look like. We are proposing that we do enrollment from December 14th through January 15th. It's important for us to do that a little early for a couple reasons. For any of our students that would end up in a MOCAP course with a non-MRH teacher, that semester is likely to start 2 weeks earlier than our semester will end. And so we want to make sure that we've got kids enrolled and they're not playing catch up further down the line. And then by our policy, the final day for folks to actually enroll or make changes would be February 4th. So just so you're aware of what that timeline looks like, and happy to take any questions you might have.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and we obviously have more information now than we did when we did this process for semester 1. So, Then I'll take a motion to go into executive session.
I move to enter executive session in accordance with section 610.021, subsection 2, 5, 6, 8, and section 610.022 of the revised statutes of Missouri on November 5th, 2020 for the following specific reasons: real estate matters, identifiable student matters.
Thank you,
Second.
Nikki. Thank you, Brandy. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we will reconvene to executive session. All right.